Last week, we began discussing Mr. Yichud. We introduced the topic. We introduced the possible, hectare for it, where the Gemara said that when you have a place, it's a pasach l'Rosh Hashanah, open to a public domain, and there's no Isra of Yichud. And we discussed the exact parameters of what constitutes a Rosh Hashanah for Yichud, what constitutes something being open. This week, I'd like to discuss some other heterim, some other ways to get around the Yisra of Yichud, if you will. Mainly that of Yichud in the presence of a spouse. There's a concept that I think most of us have heard of or are familiar with, which is Baila. When the woman's husband is in the town and there's no Yichud with a potential person, with a potential suitor, and the parameters of that. And by way of doing that, I want to discuss three questions. First of all, what exactly are the parameters of a woman being in the city? What's considered בעיר? What's the constitutes that? Can a woman, she's a real estate agent, she's going from house to house showing listings, there's no way of knowing where she is. Does that constitute בעיר? Is בעיר meaning that the husband can always find her, can always come home? Or in contrast, let's say somebody's home with a cleaning lady, their wife is next door. Is that a problem in Yichud? Again, what constitutes the spouse being present to negate the Yisra of Yichud? And we want to end off with a question that many people asked last week, and even before this share started, the first question that we got was, can you give somebody a ride? Can you drive the babysitter home? You're going to New York, could you take somebody along with you? No, is that a problem of Yichud? So we're going to start this week on page 34. The Gemara says in Yichud Kedushin, on Daf Aleph Amud Aleph, that Omer Rabba, the great line in the Gemara, Rabba said, "Baila Ba'ir," when a woman's husband is in the same city as her, Ein Choshesh Mishum Yichud. We're not Choshesh because of Yichud. So if you take a look at Rashi in 4 words tells us a lot about this heter of Baila Ba'ir. Rashi says, Lahalkus. What does it mean? Ein Choshesh Mishum Yichud. We don't give Malkus. Implying that what? If I tell you, if you do this, I won't punish you. I won't give you malchus. That doesn't mean that it's mutter, right? We're not going to punish you. It's the level. It is yichud. It just doesn't reach the metric that would obligate malchus. At least that's how it appears from Rashi. Rashi also tells us regarding the nature of the heter. What's it asking? How does it work? Rashi tells us the mifsei b'mal hashta asi. Because she's scared the husband's going to come home. What does that tell us? It's also a practical actor, meaning it's when there would be a chashash that the husband would come home. That's how it appears from Rashi. That it's not a complete heter, it doesn't make it mutter, it just makes it that you don't get malchus, and also it has to be working within the parameters of the husband might come home. But if we look at the Hemshech the Gemara, it's not so clear that that's the case. The Gemara relates, after relating that, after Rav Yosef says the din that Pesach Masuach l'Rosh Hashanah ein Choshesh Mishum Yichud, after relating the hadith that we spoke about last week, when the door is open to Rosh Hashanah and there is no Yichud, the Gemara says the following: Rav Bibi ikulu Rav Yosef. Rav Bibi went one time to visit Rav Yosef, and after Basar Dekara, after they had eaten lunch in the Rifta in the second floor of the house, Amar lahu shkuli darga, remove the ladder. After his wife, Rashi tells us they ate lunch together. Rav Bibi, Rav Yosef, and his wife were all on the second floor eating lunch. Rav Yosef and his wife both go downstairs. And before Rav Yosef leaves the house, Rav Yosef tells his wife, remove the ladder, thereby taking away the Yisra of Yichud. This way Rav Bibi can't come down to the first floor. So Gemara says, what's the problem? Seemingly Rav Yosef is just walking out to go to shul. He's just walking out to go to the Beis Medrash, to the marketplace. What's the problem of Yichud? Why does they have to remove the stairs? Rabba said that when the husband is in the city, there's no problem with Yichud. So why was Rav Bibi worried? Why was Rav Yosef worried about Rav Bibi being alone with his wife? So the Gemara says, Shani Rav Bibi was different because Rav Bibi had a pre-existing relationship with Rav Yosef's wife. They knew each other previously. The Gemara says, Liba, Gaspa. There was a familiarity, there was a friendship, there was a kinship between the two of them. And in that case, we don't say Baila Ba'ir that it's mutter. So Tosfos right away asks on Rashi that from the formation of the Gemara asks, why does Rav Yosef feel the need to remove the stairs? So the Gemara has to come and say, this case, even though he wouldn't usually have to, this is different because they had a pre-existing relationship. Tosfos asks, but according to Rashi, that Rashi tells me that Baila Ba'ir is only ein loikin alav. We don't give malchus, we don't punish you, but there's still also, why do I have a question? Why Rav Yosef removed the stairs? The problem with Baila Ba'ir is Baila Ba'ir doesn't solve the issue of Yichud, it just takes down the severity. So Rav Yosef took away the stairs because, there's not malchus, but there's still an issur. So from this Gemara, Tosfos proves not like Rashi, and he's of the opinion that Baila Ba'ir, when her husband is in the city with her, there's no problem with Yichud whatsoever. Regarding how to answer this Rashi, there are a number of ways of its understanding, mainly that Rashi is referring the Hamshach of the Gemara, the context of the build-up of the Sugya, that's what Rashi is referring to, but not that Rashi means that it's also those are somehow want to learn to answer Rashi. But either way, it comes out from this Gemara that we have a machlokes between Rashi and Tosfos, at least at first glance. If Baila Ba'ir is a heter, does it allow Yichud? If somebody, we spoke about last week, if somebody wanted to have a meeting with an female employee, we gave various heterim, leaving the door open. There's a window into the office for Moshe if the door is unlocked, but they would have to answer the Chazon Ish. But if you can't reach those metrics, for whatever reason, the door has to be locked, it has to be a closed door meeting, there's no window looking in, for whatever reason, is there another possible heter? So according to Tosfos, we might have the way of Baila Ba'ir. Baila Ba'ir might allow it, right? From first glance, according to Rashi, seemingly doesn't allow it. It just takes away the severity of the sin. And also, it comes down from Rashi that the problem is, or the solution of Baila Ba'ir is a practical one. Seemingly like that of Pesach Rosh Hashanah, it's open. We're choshesh somebody's going to come in. She's worried that her husband's going to walk in on her. It's a practical solution. So we're going to discuss what does liba gaspa mean. What constitutes liba gaspa? We're going to discuss that. So when we discuss the parameters of what defines liba gaspa, that will come up discussion. When the Rambam quotes this Gemara, the Rambam says the following on page 35. The Rambam says, "Eish is ish shehi baila ba'ir, ein choshesh liyichud." A woman that her husband's in town, we're not choshesh liyichud, which is mashma so there's no issur. Mipnei, but why does the Rambam? The Rambam says why? She'ein was baila la, because the fear of her husband is ever present. Her husband's in the city, she's going to be scared to have an affair, she's going to be scared to do anything. That's why it helps. This very much seems to be contrary to that of Rashi. Rashi seems to view it as a practical heter. Her husband's going to come home, and it might be limited to parameters of her husband arriving home. The Rambam says, Amos Baila, when her husband is in the vicinity, she's scared of him. She's scared to do anything that would jeopardize the relationship, meaning it's more of a psychological heter more than a practical heter. Potentially, right? Meaning, does it have to be practical? Does it have to be that the husband's going to be able to walk on them? Or is it that, generally, anywhere in the city, they're around, they're in the same vicinity, she's scared. So we're going to discuss exactly how the place can view it. Does the place can view it as a practical heter or a psychological heter? And like you said, there are various nafkaminahs that come out of this, right? Does it have to be that the husband can come home? So, in Shulchan Aruch, this Gemara is brought down halacha. The halacha says on page 36, the Mechaber writes in Siman Chavbeis, Sif Ches, Isha Shabayla Ba'ir, a woman that its husband in the city, Ein Choshesh Lis Yachid Ima, we're not choshesh for yichud with her, if Nesha Eimas Bayla Aleha, because she's scared of her husband, like that out of the Rambam, seemingly making it a psychological heter. But when do we not say this heter? Bim Haya Ze Gaspa, if they have a relationship, a pre-existing relationship, Kegoin, for example, Shagadla Imai, they grew up together, they were friends, they played together as children, Oishihir Krivasai, or their relatives, their family, not that of a sister or a mother that we said there is no Yisrael Yichud, a cousin, a sister-in-law, that there's a pre-existing relationship between them. Lo yisachid ima afal pisha ba'ila b'ir. In those cases, there is no heter of ba'ila b'ir. Meaning, so we're going to speak about that. We're going to speak about that. So regarding, right, so we bring this as a heter. The Shulchan Aruch doesn't look used like Rashi, passing like the Rambam, that it's a heter, except for the case of Liba Gaspa. So how does the place use this heter? Is it on par with that we said last week? Pesach Lushas Rabim, which seemingly we spoke about, means that it's no longer Yichud, right? Once it's a public domain, there's no longer Yichud. Or is this Yichud, but it's allowed because of other circumstances, mitigating circumstances. So if you look at the Shulchan Aruch and Tiftes, it brings the halacha that we spoke about last week. There's no Isser Erva, there's no Isser Yichud at all. And there the Shulchan Aruch, the Mechaber doesn't say the Liba Gaspa is different, seemingly implying that Pesach Lushas Rabim makes it that there is no Yichud at all, and therefore there's no reason to be machmer in any case. But over here with Ba'ila B'ir, seems to be that we do view it as solidarity. They are combined to a place that we are worried, but there's another reason to tell us not to be worried. Now, regarding the exact parameters of Ba'ila B'ir, the Pischei Tshuva quotes the Chachmas Adam, Chai Adam, where he rules that it's specifically when she is home. When she's home in their own house, and the husband knows where she is, then we say Ba'ila B'ir. But if she's at somebody else's house, if she's at his house, or if the husband gave them reshus to be alone together, then there's no heter of Ba'ila B'ir. Which would which would make it pretty much irrelevant for our discussion of Yichud in a workplace. That a woman, when she's at work, when you have a female employee, you're calling in for a meeting, or you're showing a house, or she's a real estate agent, she's showing a listing, the husband doesn't know if it's a listing, he doesn't know where she is. And even if it's at an office, even if the husband knows where she is, it's not at home. And seemingly the Chachmas Adam would not allow it and would not say the heter Ba'ila B'ir. So we're going to speak about that, and we're also going to see, this is one opinion in the Chachmas Adam. Do we take that on? So I want to bring Rav Moshe. What was Rav Moshe's shita when it came to Ba'ila B'ir? So if you turn the page to page 38, basically, meaning the husband, let's say somebody's wife, when he gave her shus, that means she has no fear whatsoever. She has no fear of being alone with this person. She has no emas baila, because the husband already allowed them to be alone. The husband already knows they're private. The husband's not going to go in on them because he already said, okay, you need to meet with this guy. You need to meet with this client for an hour. I'm not going to disturb you. So that's the biggest chash of Yichud. The husband's never going to walk in. She's not scared of her husband. She knows her husband's not going to. That's this opinion. We're going to discuss about other solutions. That's Ramosha says. Ramosha, before he gets into this Chachmas Adam, if the husband permits it, doesn't know where she is, if she's gone for a duration of time, Ramosha wants to first define what's considered Ba'ila B'ir, what's considered being in the city. Ramosha says, if let's say there's a prison in the city and the husband's in prison in the city, we wouldn't say Ba'ila B'ir. There's no way of him coming home. There's no way of him catching her. There's no way of them meeting up. But just because he's technically within the boundaries of the city, Ba'ila B'ir, the Moshe takes it as a pshitos that if he's in the situation that there's no way for him to come home, he's in prison, or Moshe says that he works for somebody else. He works 9 to 5. They live in Queens. He works in the Bronx. It's an hour and a half, an hour commute, and he has to be there from 9 to 5. There is no heter of Ba'ila B'ir for the duration of the time that he has to be at work, because he's stuck there. But Rav Moshe says if he's self-employed, right, if he doesn't have to ask his boss to go home early, even if he does have an office in Manhattan, since there's a possibility that he can go home and surprise his wife, then we would say the heter of Ba'ila B'ir. So Rav Moshe again is, he's viewing it as a practical heter. He's limiting it to cases where the husband could come home. It's likely, there's a certain likelihood of him coming home. So we're going to speak about that, but that, that's a very broad definition. Technically you can be in the same city if you're in Queens and the Bronx. It'll take you an hour and a half. But New Haven and Hampton, it's 5 minutes. Is that not by Year? So that's usually left to the discretion of that's subject to opinion amongst the Paiskim, and that's a shayla that should be asked by a Rav. Meaning, and Ramesh from the Chuvas, it seems to be that it's that it's not hard for him to get home. So New Haven to Hampton would possibly still be considered, or New Haven to Milford would possibly still considered by Year, but Riverdale to Far Rockaway, which is technically still in New York, but even without traffic, is a good hour plus. If she knows that he's an hour away, then that's a shayla that has to be asked to a Rav. So Ramosha says, though, regarding the Chachmas Adam, that if she gave reshus, if she gave permission, or if he doesn't know where he is, he says he doesn't think that that's the Ikar Psak. He thinks in the Ikar Adin it's fine. The Ikar Adin it's fine, there's no problem. The Chachmas Adam is being machmer, but about Nefesh, there is a room to be machmer like the Chachmas Adam. He thinks that Baal also has a psychological underpinning. If it doesn't have to be at home, it has to be that they're in the same vicinity, and that would be a heter, according to Ramosha. So if you turn the page, the Sefer Darchei Halacha, the Bar Halacha, what would be if you can give an example of a case? So I think it depends on the parameters, right? Let's say if somebody's stuck at work, if somebody's on 9 to 5, then you have to ask a Rav. But you just, I think if there's general column that one could, just like Hilchos Shabbos, there's certain dinim that are pashat to you, and there's certain dinim that are more complex in their nature. There's more on the rooks, and now you have to ask a Rav. I don't think it differs much from other halachas that when there's a clear halacha, it's fine. When there's a shayla, if we pass with Moshe or with the Madam or the Chazon Ish, you have to ask a Rav. But in the Sefer Dvar Halacha, he brings from the Chazon Ish that the Chazon Ish was makel by all the above cases. The Chazon Ish was makel that if it's in a different house, if it's not in their own home, it's fine. Even if he gave reshus for them to be alone in a closed door meeting, even if they lock the door, the Chazon Ish said it's fine. And even if the husband is stuck at work, if he's not going to come home, it's fine. The Chazon Ish ruled. Because he said it's a psychological heter. It's a mindset that your husband is home, your spouse is in the same town, you're going to see them that night. You're scared to do anything. It doesn't mean that right now something's going to stop you from doing it. It means that the relationship is such that your husband's in town. So therefore, even any case that would potentially mitigate the husband, walking in on them, that's not a problem because the whole heter has nothing to do with the husband walking in on them. The heter relies upon that she feels a certain level of commitment when her husband's around. So that's the Chazon Ish. The Shevet Alevi, Rav Osner, holds not like the Chazon Ish. He holds that it has to be on the next page that there's a likelihood of the husband encountering them, walking in on them. And again, that parameter is Kol Yishikol Adas. Every person should be able to decide, is this something that you would like to know? If you know where your wife is, if she's a real estate agent, she's showing listings, and which house she's going to be at from which time, then it would be fine, he already is. But it has to be that there's some level of likelihood of the husband walking in on them. If it's the case that he gave reshus for them to lock the door, because this is a closed door meeting, Shevet Levi says it's a problem. We're not going to make B'nai Yisrael Prutzim Barayas. The Minchas Yitzchak, another famous Paisik in Eretz Yisrael, ruled, in such a case where there is no likelihood, he felt that you can't totally rely on it. But if you have a case like we spoke last week, there's a discussion of the Paiskim, if the door is unlocked or closed, we brought down the Tamachaykas Paiskim. He said if you have heterim that people argue about, but there is a room to be makel, then it's fine. Meaning you can use it in conjunction with something else. It's not a blanket heter. It doesn't save you from any potential isser, but it does allow one to rely on other heterim. It does rely on one to be makel. So if you turn the page to page 47, we wanted people to ask what constitutes liba gaspa. So we brought down from the Shulchan Aruch that if they grew up together, if they're family, if they're related, then there's a line of reasoning to be matter liba gaspa. The Aruch HaShulchan says, there's a line of reasoning to say that it is liba gaspa. The Aruch HaShulchan says another case of liba gaspa. Let's say they're in a work environment together. He does business with women. They have a relationship. From that, that's also liba gaspa. So what constitutes? Just because you're a proprietor of a store and you have, female customers, you own a supermarket, and you have female customers, and she's the only one in the store, or you sell jewelry, whatever it is, and there's a female customer, she's the only one in the store, that's liba gaspa. So the place you understand that that's not liba gaspa. Liba gaspa doesn't mean that you encounter a woman in a business relationship, in a financial context. What the exact parameters are left to a Rav's discretion, but the general idea is if you're in an office setting, how do you interact with your female employees? Is it Mr. Jones and Miss Jones? Right? Do you refer to each other formally, or is it on a first name basis? Do you talk? Meaning, is the conversation that happens at the office solely business related, a very formal relationship, or will you talk about how your day went? What's going on in your family life? What's the relationship? Is it that of friendship? Or that of a total business relationship? And that's the distinction the Paiskim makes. The exact parameters, though, is left for each Rav to decide. But just because you have a female secretary, just because somebody has somebody in their office, doesn't automatically constitute liba gaspa. So to summarize, can somebody have a meeting, a woman, in a case that we don't have the heter from last week? Most Paiskim would assume that, again, if it's a formal relationship and the husband knows that she's at work, then it's fine. If there's a bit of a familiar relationship with her boss, or she's showing a listing, then it would be left up to the discretion of the local Rav. But most places I found are online to be matter. They're online to rely on the Psakim and the Chazon Ish, assuming that it's a psychological answer. So moving on to page 48. Well, just because they met privately doesn't automatically constitute a relationship, as we discussed. Meaning, I call my employee into an office, and our whole discussion is about the bottom line, is about marketing, is about sales. That we wouldn't view as a personal relationship. That's a relationship. That's a very formal relationship. The lawyer, right? If you have somebody working for you, an assistant. As long as the relationship keeps its formal boundaries, it's a business relationship, then that would not constitute liba gaspa. But if you start off every meeting, how is your family? How are your kids? What did you do over the weekend? That would be left up to a Rav to describe. Is that just small talk that's acceptable? But again, that's beyond the context. That's every relationship would be different, and that would be a case where you would call a Rav. That would be a case that would be left up to the particular discretion. Is what lechatchila? What's the case? What's the case? So two non-Jewish women is very different. Who said you have Baila Be'ir by two non? We're going to discuss if you have Baila Be'ir by non-Jewish women. Let's say he has an office and he's meeting with a female secretary, from secretary, or the office constitutes. There's left of the office him and his secretary. They're the only ones left in the office right now, right? Her husband, they live in New Haven. The office is down the road. Her husband's home. Her husband's in town. Is that Baila Be'ir? If the relationship is entirely formal, according to majority of poskim, there's no problem. That's exactly what Baila Be'ir does. If you're going to tell me that you can't have Yichud with a woman because we're choshesh for things, then why would you have Baila Be'ir? So we're going to discuss non-Jewish women. right now we're discussing a Jewish woman, a frum lady with her husband in the town. With a non-Jewish woman, that's Yichud for the most part. The Gemara says you don't have a heter of Baila Be'ir with a non-Jewish woman because we assume that her husband wouldn't have a problem with her having an affair. That's what the Gemara says. Or she doesn't have the same aim as Baila. There's not the same commitment to the relationship. But with a frum woman, if the relationship is entirely formal, then there's no chash. We would assume that that's exactly what Baila Be'ir does for you. So we're going to discuss that right now. We're going to discuss that right now. What happens with multiples? Correct. Liba Gaspa beats Baila Be'ir, but it doesn't beat Pischad or Shusarab. It doesn't beat if the door is open to a public place, to a hallway, or there's a window looking in. Then even with Liba Gaspa would be fine because we'd assume that is not seclusion, right? We assume that when the door is open, you're not alone, so it doesn't matter who it is. But when you are alone, and we're just trying to say something that should mitigate it, well, it depends who you're alone with. So the question was brought up: what happens when it's multiples of women? So the Gemara says, "Lo Yisyachid." The Mishnah says on page 48. That was kedushin. We saw last week. Lo Yisyachid Adam im shtei nashim. One man should not have yichud with two women. Aval isha achas misyachedes im shtei anashim. But one woman could have yichud with two men. Rav Shimon said, "Af ish echad misyachid im shtei nashim." Even one man could have yichud with two women. When his wife is with him. So there's a discussion amongst the Rishonim. Is this a saying that's attributed to Rav Shimon? The Rav Shimon is qualifying his statement. When can one man be alone with two women? When his wife is with him? Or is this a general heter that when did we say that one man can't be alone with two women? That's when he's just with those two women. But the ishta imay, so we're going to think about that. But if, let's say, he's in a room, then we assume it's fine. So first, let's bring down the din of Ishta Imay. The Gemara, the Shulchan Aruch paskins on page 50 and page 51. Kol Isha she'asur litziyachid im haisa Ishta Imay. If there's any woman that you're also to be with, if your wife is with you, then it's mutter. Areza mutter litziyachid mipnei she'ishta mishamartoi. Because his wife is protecting him, his wife is going to make sure he doesn't do anything. But with the guy with a non-Jew, we don't have this heter of ishta imay because, like we mentioned, with a non-Jewish husband or non-Jewish wife, right? They don't care what their spouse does in halacha. That's how we view it. So, what constitutes ishta imay? So, Rav Moshe on page 53 says that ishta imay is not the same thing as Baila Be'ir. It definitely doesn't have the same workings as when the husband is in the city, and we see that from the wording of the Gemara, from the wording of the Shulchan Aruch. Whereas opposed to Baila Be'ir, when her husband's in the city, the Mechaber said, "Emas Baila Allah." The fear of her husband's there, meaning it's a psychological one. But when it relates the heter of Ishta Ima, his wife is with him, it doesn't bring a psychological way. Since Ishta Mishamartai, her wife is protecting him. His wife is there to make sure nothing happens. For much of then rules, it would have to be that it's within reason that the wife is going to walk in on them. Meaning, if the wife is down by the neighbor, she's going to come home, then it wouldn't be a problem of Ishta Imay. Then it would be constant Ishta Imay. But if she goes to work, then Rav Moshe says you wouldn't have Ishta Imay. Because there's no psychological component to it. We don't view that men have the same fear of their wives or the same commitment to the relationship as women do. So therefore, it would have to be a practical answer. It would have to be that, your wife is in the house. You can have a meeting with a woman in your office, but the wife's in the house. She can walk in any time. That would be fine. She could be down the block. It would be fine. But if she goes to work or she went shopping and she's going to be gone for the duration of time, then there's no line to be made amongst the placemen. So now I want to address the last thing for today. What about giving somebody a ride? Right? This doesn't really have to do with the cases that we discussed earlier. We just finished discussing, yichud in the presence of a spouse. So we said we view that of a husband to be a psychological one for the most part. So therefore, there's a lot more room to be makel, even if the husband's at work. There might be a little bit of a practical component, but its main underlying axiom is not its practical proponent, it's its psychological one. As opposed to Ishta Imai, his wife being in town, that's totally practical and would have to be in a case that it's within reason that she would walk in on them. So what we want to discuss now is giving somebody a ride. And the fear of giving somebody a ride is the following. Right? Not that there's yichud while they're in the car. There's windows, everybody can see in. But it's, do we allow yichud in a case where we're scared that the situation they're in now is not yichud, but it could very easily turn to yichud. They could very easily turn off the road. They can go somewhere, even though they're in public now. We're scared that it might lead to yichud. So if you turn to page 54, the Shulchan Aruch lists a whole number of people that even though we said one man with two women is a problem of yichud, but if you're with the following two women, even ishtay ena imoy, even if your wife's not there, it's not a problem of yichud. Mutar lisyachid im shtei yavamis. You could be yishachid if somebody has two wives. If somebody can be alone with two women that are married to the same husband, that's fine, because we assume that there's an animosity between the two women. Ayim shtei tzaros, ayim isha v'chamaisai, or a woman with her mother-in-law, or isha v'as chayla, or a woman with her stepdaughter. Ayim isha v'as chamaisai, v'pnei sheshaynai zu ezu v'ein mechafei zu ezu. Any women that we assume that there's a certain level of animosity between the two of them, sister-in-laws, mother-in-law, whatever it is, that relationship, there is a heter of being mishachid with them, because we assume they won't cover up for each other or they won't want to be together. Shulchan Aruch says, "V'chein im isha sheyesh ima tinoikis ktana sheyedas tam bia ve'enu misres atma lebia." The same thing would be for a little girl, that she knows that something's going on. If they were to be together, she would understand that there's something inappropriate happening, but she is not old enough to have any desire to participate or see any value in it. So if that case, if she's with them, it's fine. So the Chalkas Mechaykik says, what happens if you're going on a trip somewhere, you're going with the wagon driver, a woman and her daughter are going with the wagon driver, and they're traveling from town to town. Would that constitute yichud? What I say, the woman is with a shemara, she's with a girl that wouldn't want to participate, would understand there's something wrong. Is that okay? Or are we scared that, over the duration of the course of the trip, those girls are going to have to go to the bathroom, they're going to be separated, and that might lead to yichud. So the Bach rules, and the Chalkas Mechaykik brings from the Bach and the Marshal, that's a problem, that we're scared that it might lead to a situation of yichud. Whereas the Taz argues, the Taz says, if you're scared that it's the lead to a situation of yichud, then you should never have a heter, never meet each other. Why are they allowed to talk to each other in front of the street? Even the Rosh Hashanah, maybe the conversation will go somewhere on both sides. They'll go somewhere private. You should never have any heterim of yichud if we're worried that they might go somewhere. So therefore, the Taz rules against his father-in-law that even if you're traveling somewhere, even if you're going with a little child traveling somewhere, and we're worried that it might lead to yichud, it's not a problem because we're not scared that something's going to happen. The whole din of yichud is only in the case of yichud. And when the daughter is going to go to the bathroom, whatever, we assume that the woman would be smart enough to go with her. We don't assume that people are voluntarily going to put themselves in Makam Isser. It's just a safeguard that Peru gave not to have this Makam Isser. Well, the problem, there's no problem. Yichud is not, we're not worried they're going to talk. Correct. I don't know if the Taz's reasoning is simply that you can't pass women in the street. I think the Taz is that we don't find that there's a problem, to do business with them and to talk to them in the marketplace. Right? That might not be the most appropriate way of doing things. That's a whole separate discussion. We don't find that it's usher because of yichud. Right? We don't find that there's this, you can't talk to a woman at a Shabbos. Whether you can't do something because of yichud. So Rav Moshe discusses it. Rav Moshe says, maybe based on what you're saying, so oh, okay, but then you would come out with, what if the wagon's open? Is it a different? What if the wagon's open? Well, we're gonna see. We're gonna see. We're gonna see. So we're gonna see. We're gonna see. Rav Moshe speaks about it. The first case Rav Moshe gives is a woman that had to take a taxi to go to the mikveh. And it's important to note that Rav Moshe's case is the mikveh in a different city. That might play relevant. Rav Moshe says she shouldn't go by herself. The husband should come with her because it's Isser Yichud. And even though, he's busy driving, and we're not worried that something's going to happen while he's driving, we're worried maybe, they'll touch, they'll do other Isurim. That's why he felt the car was a problem. The Rav Moshe says, let's say there are kids at home. The husband can't stay behind. The husband can't leave the kids at home. How else is she supposed to go to mikvah? She can go by herself in the taxi. B'shas hatzchak, Rav Moshe said it's fine. But the chatzila, one should be careful not to do that. And the other case Rav Moshe gives in another tshuva is the following: somebody is driving, in Rav Moshe's case, driving to the country. They're driving the mountains, and a woman heard that he's going up, asked him for a ride. Is that okay? So Rav Moshe, again, for the same line of reasoning, worried that that they're going to go on roads and they'll be alone, and it's very easy for them to, if the conversation goes well, to go somewhere. Rav Moshe said that one should try not to, but if they're not going to understand that the reason why you're doing it is a Yichud, they're going to think you just don't want to give people rides, you're a mean person, or if it's a non-Jewish woman and we're worried about maybe Ava, the Jew doesn't want to spend time with me, the Jew's being mean, then Rav Moshe said those would all constitute a shas hatzchak and would allow you to give somebody a ride. Rav Moshe says both. With a Jewish woman, if she's not going to understand, or she's going to get upset, or it's going to cause a fight, then you can give it a ride. And a non-Jewish woman, maybe because Rav Moshe basically says you have a good reason for it, Rav Moshe would allow it. But the starting point of Rav Moshe is that it's a problem, but if you have a good reason, Rav Moshe would be mekel. Rav Shlomo Zalman, though, says entirely that Rav Moshe, he thinks that it's completely fine. There's no Isser of Yichud. We don't say that we're worried you're going to go to someplace of Yichud as long as the windows aren't tinted. You're driving on a road, even if it's a quiet road. People drive by. You pull up the side of the road. People are going to come over. People are going to worry. It's like it's like being in a room with the door unlocked, with the door open, that since somebody's going to pass by, somebody's going to see it's not a problem in Yichud. And Rav Shlomo Zalman felt that's the exact same thing with giving a ride. Yeah. If you pull over, you can't go to the shoulder. What we're worried that they're going to drive to a hotel, they're going to go to a forest, they're going to go to somebody's house. That would not question for Shlomo Zalman like the task. The whole thing would be, it wouldn't be practical. So we find this distinction between Rav Moshe and Rav Shlomo Zalman. Rav Shlomo Zalman feels that there is no problem at all. Rav Moshe holds that, it's best to avoid. L'chatchila, it's a problem. But if there are mitigating circumstances, it would be allowed. The Shevet HaLevi, Rav Vosner, though, says, if it's at night, or it's a dark road, then it's a problem. But he says this is all when it's going from one city to the next. You're going on a backcountry road, then it's a problem. But you're giving somebody a ride home within the same neighborhood, within the same community, the same city, then he feels it's not a problem. And I think that's also Rav Moshe. Rav Moshe's whole lechatchila is both cases. It's the woman going to a different city to use the mikveh. It's taking her up to the country, which is a long drive out of the city. Those are, according to the Shevet HaLevi, if it's during the day, it's fine. If it's night, it's a problem. Rav Moshe, it doesn't matter. Lechatchila, you should not do it. But Rav Moshe doesn't seem to make a decision by day or by night, seemingly because the road doesn't make a difference. You're on the road, people drive by day and by night. But therefore, he felt it's a problem, but if there are mitigating circumstances allowed, Rav Shlomo Zalman felt the road is always a public domain, no matter what the circumstances, no matter what the road is. And we're not worried that they're going to go somewhere, and therefore Rav Shlomo Zalman ruled it's fine. So in conclusion, Driving a babysitter home, I don't think we found an opinion that would be machmer. Meaning, even according to Moshe, you're just going down the block, you're in a public space. We're not going from a different city. That would be fine. Giving somebody a ride to New York. So, Sheva Levi might be a problem because it's dark roads, but if you're on the 95 or the 100, like those are lit up highways, that's itself, you have to ask a Rav. But Moshe wouldn't make a distinction, or Moshe would think that you shouldn't, but again, mitigating circumstances is allowed, and Rosh Shlomo Zalman would allow it. It doesn't make it. We didn't see anything that makes a distinction, but I think it would definitely help. Moshe is worried about touching whatever, so if she's in the back seat, that probably would help for a Moshe. The Shevet Levi, it wouldn't make a difference because he's not worried about them touching. He's worried about them, going somewhere. The conversation is going to stay the same. Rosh Shlomo Zalman wouldn't make a distinction or allow it either way. I have no idea. The window, nobody can get in. He doesn't allow anybody to crawl in. Maybe if you can't see through the window, opening the window open, this way somebody can see. But maybe it's had a certain mind frame. But in terms of creating a heter for it, it doesn't. The heter would be that people can see into the car. Now, opening the window, no, it's not need halacha, but it could set a certain framework. We're doing this. We're not creating a relationship. We're keeping in mind that this is really not a lechatchila. I'm just giving you a ride because you need a ride. But lechatchila, it's not something that we should be doing. Where is the what? So that would come from the Shevet Levi. Shevet Levi said it's dark and it's hard for people to see, then it's a problem. So if the light's on, this way people can see in, that would take away that problem. That's the Shevet Levi also. The Shevet Levi says if it's a busy street, it's a little street, even at night it's fine. But if it's a not busy street, that's when he holds the problem. A non-busy street, you can't see in, he holds the problem. What about a what? Male realtor, it's a real problem, so you leave the door open. If it's open to listing, so that male realtor will have to rely on Pesach Lushas Harabim. If it's in a building, the door is open. A building, there's a hallway there. People living in the building. They're going to walk around. They're going to come. Yeah. So I don't follow them around and all the room. So there are those that want to say, yeah, we're saving it. We have another couple weeks. There's